Season. RacinBoys.com. We welcome in Scott Traylor from RacinBoys.com. I see these guys every time we're at Kansas Speedway. They're some of the hardest-working guys out there. Scott, how you doing? Thanks for joining us today on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio.
Jim, buddy, we're doing fine here at Racing Boys. How you guys doing today?
Doing well, doing well. Well, tell me about Chili Bowl. I was on the website earlier this morning, and I see that you guys have a bunch of programming coming up, really beginning today and going all week. How big of an event is this for you guys, Scott?
Well, this is our biggest broadcast of the year. We broadcast all the Lucas Oil ASCS National Sprint Car races on our website, and that was 62 events last year. And we broadcast a few other events, the United Rebel Sprint Car Series as well. But for us, everything is on the line when it comes to the Chili Bowl because we have listeners from 70 countries, all 50 states. So, yeah, this is the big one. And most of our broadcasts are free, and this is one of the few that we charge for people to listen to. So it's big for us, and we're really excited about our 8th year doing the Chili Bowl Nationals.
Scott, I understand that you're not only an announcer, but you've been very active as a race car driver also. That helps quite a bit when you're calling a race, I think.
Well, it does, buddy. I raced off and on for 35 years. I was a car owner for the last several years. Clint Boyer drove my ARCA car for me. I don't know if you guys know that. When Clint ran second down there at Nashville and Richard Childress saw him running that race, that was driving my car down there. And Carl Edwards has drove for me. He won the World Cup 100 driving my super truck at I-70 Speedway in Odessa. Buddy, I don't know if you remember this or not, but back in the day, in the TNN days, when you were doing ASA, we did a radio show together, a pre-race show out at I-70 Speedway. So that's way back in the day. That's about 15 years ago, coming up on 15 years ago. So I remember those days well when you used to come out to I-70 and follow around the Robins and the ASA series, which was one of my favorite series at that time.
Wow, I can put your face with the name now, and had a great time at I-70, and that was a time when I was doing TV for TNN,
right.
and the racing was tremendous. And you brought up some names that are big that drove your car and truck, but you also have some pretty big names that are entered in the Chili Bowl coming up next week.
We really do. The obvious names are the Swindells. Kevin is going for his fourth in a row. His dad has won 5 drillers, and that's the trophy that they give out at the Chili Bowl. So those are the 2 names that I think everybody is looking at right now to see if they're going to win this year. But you look at guys like Tony Stewart, who's going to qualify, I think, on Tuesday night because they've got the Daytona testing down there. You've got Casey Kane is going to be there. Jason Leffler is going to be there. A lot of names that you'll recognize here on satellite radio that are going to be running at the Chili Bowl. So it should be pretty exciting.
We're talking to Scott Traylor of RacinBoys.com. I want to ask you about people like Clint and Carl back when they were driving for you. There are a lot. Buddy and I talk about all the time on this show, Scott, about how across the country there are so many talented race car drivers that for one reason or another are never going to get their shot, whether it's economic and things like that. They just, they may have as much talent as people in the National Series, but opportunity, they just don't get that window. Where did Clint and Carl rank amongst their peers at the time they were driving for you? Were they head and shoulders? Did you know automatically that these guys were going to be big deals nationally? Or is that margin just razor thin between a guy like a Boyer and an Edwards and some of the guys who still race on a weekly basis?
Well, we have a lot of talented drivers that, if given the opportunity here in the Midwest, I think could make a go of it down south. But Clint Boyer was head and shoulders above anybody around this area in his time. He just came off 2 championships, one on dirt, one on asphalt at I-70 and Lakeside Speedway. He'd won several championships before that. And my first opportunity to work with Clint was driving my modified out at I-70 Speedway. And he qualified his first time at I-70. And, buddy, you know that track. It's like a Bristol or a Winchester or a Salem, real fast, big half-mile track. He qualified second, nearly won the pole his very first time on pavement. So that shows you a little bit about his skill. We had a good car, but still, with the lack of experience that he had, he showed that he was pretty dominant. Then we went down to Moberly, just outside of Columbia, Missouri, and we ran second to a guy by the name of Carl Edwards, which was a great little battle between Clint and Carl in modifieds. to this day, Clint Boyer says that Carl was cheating during that race, had too big a motor, but that's a whole nother story. But, Carl, I will tell you this. Carl used to come over and ask to drive my car all the time. And I didn't know what to think of Carl. Everybody knows the famous cards he would hand out and ask people to drive his car or drive their cars. And, I just didn't know what to think of it. And at that time, I was still driving myself, and I wasn't really interested in being a car owner. Only did I learn later the talent that Carl had. And he only drove for me one time. He'd already driven 5 races for Roush. Remember, before he had that super chip deal down there on the truck, he had the plain white truck. And during that period of 5 races when he just started for Roush, that's when he drove my super truck. So he'd already kind of made it down to NASCAR land, but he hadn't established himself as one of the elite drivers as he is now. But those two guys are probably as talented of drivers as I've seen come out of this area in a long, long time.
Wow. I love those kind of stories. And I would also like for you to kind of explain to the people who've never had an opportunity to even know what the Chili Bowl is. Kind of explain the complex that the racetrack is built in. And also, you don't have to worry about rain, but I always have wondered how they vent for an indoor event with cars inside a building.
Well, it is one of the largest freestanding buildings without any poles in it in the world. I think it's like the 3rd in the world, 2nd in the country. It's the Tulsa Expo Center right in the middle of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it is the most unique thing. We'll have 250 cars in there with their trailers and a 5th-mile dirt track. And it's one of the most exciting events that you could possibly go to when you think about it. 250 midgets out there racing. These cars are, they run them all over the country. But you'll never see more than maybe 40 or 50 at any one event. And so 250 to show up, that's remarkable in itself. You mentioned about the fumes or how do they handle that. Emmett Hahn and Lanny Edwards, the promoters of the Chili Bowl, have worked with the city of Tulsa. Every year they make improvements to suck the fumes out of that place. And I will tell you, we did the broadcast of the Tulsa Shootout down there last week, and I don't think I've ever seen it where it's better than right now of being able to vent that building. Very little fume problems down there at all. They put some new fans down at one end of the track where they suck out a bunch of the fumes out of there. They've been putting $1 million worth of equipment in there year in and year out. So it's really not an issue. Is there a little bit of fumes in there? Yes, but they've really got that under control here as of the last couple of years.
Scott, let's talk a little bit about Kansas Speedway coming up. We'll be back there, I believe, in April, and one of your shows, Track Talk, obviously based on the big sports radio station out in KC, Sports Radio 810 WHB. That reconfiguration, we didn't know really what to expect until we went there for the first race not the first race in the Chase, but the Chase race at Kansas this year. By and large, talk to me about the reviews and the improvements, the repaving and reconfiguration that were done at Kansas. What's the general consensus of how that all went?
I think the excitement is at an all-time high right now for Kansas Speedway. There was a few people that thought, and drivers, and we heard the drivers, and when they do the press conferences, that, there were some that were not happy that they made the change. But that was probably due to the fact that they ran pretty good there with the previous surface. But I think anybody that knows anything about Kansas Speedway, the weather that we have up here, there was chunks of the racetrack. No, they weren't huge chunks, and they weren't right in the groove, but they were going to be an issue. And we didn't want to have a debacle like we had at Daytona on national television at our home track here. So I think 2 thumbs up on the configuration, the banking, and pleasantly surprised how the groove widened out at the very first race. So many people worry about, 2 or 3 years, this track is going to be really good. For most fans that were there and the people that watched it on television, I think that is going to be a little quicker of a process here at Kansas Speedway than maybe at some other tracks. The banking isn't so much that the speeds are so great that they have to stay on the bottom. Though they're still really high, the speeds are really high because of the additional banking, but they were still able to move up and make somewhat of a second groove. And we saw some side-by-side racing, so I'm really encouraged that we're going to see 3 wide racing at Kansas Speedway in the second year of that configuration.
Okay, my last question about the Chili Bowl, which is current right at the moment. Out of 250 cars that show up, how many make the A main? And how did they qualify to get into the final event?
Well, that would take me about 30 minutes to explain it, but there's the passing points, and there's a lot of different ways. They're going to have multiple chances to get in. But to be honest with you, buddy, there's a lot of luck involved with making the A main. They'll start 24 cars, and then if Kevin Swindell doesn't make it in, then he'll be number 25 because the winner of the previous Chili Bowl has the option of getting in. So Kevin Swindell is going to be in if he doesn't make it. But 24 cars running 55 laps. And you ask, why 55 laps? Well, last year on Saturday at the Chili Bowl, unfortunately, during a domestic dispute at home, Donnie Ray Crawford lost his life on Saturday, and he is just one of the mainstays at the Chili Bowl and down in the Tulsa area and ASCS Racing, a 360 sprint car driver. So in tribute to Donnie Ray Crawford, they've added 5 laps to the A main, so it's now 55 laps. I think you can start anywhere in this race and win. Doesn't matter with the amount of laps that they have down there on the 5th mile track. We've seen Sammy Swindell work his way back up through the field. He's an exception. But you look at the drivers that are going to be there, everybody that has, the most talented drivers. The list is long of drivers, and I'm afraid to mention any of them because I'm afraid I'll forget a couple of them. But there's probably 25 to 30 cars out of those 250 that are capable of winning the Chili Bowl. So a lot of luck, a long week, and you really got to bring your A game and have your program right on top of it if you're going to have a chance to win.
The only place you can hear it live is on RacinBoys Radio, so we urge you to do that beginning next week. Scott, thanks so much for the time. We're going to be listening to that coverage. Sounds like a great event, and can't wait to see you guys when we head out to Kansas in April.
Well, we sure appreciate you guys giving us the time, and I just want to throw in that we're going to do the post-race press conferences live on RacinBoys. That will be free. The broadcast itself is $9.95 for all 5 nights. It's only $2 a day. It's very reasonable, and we're going to have all kinds of video packages that we're going to put up on the RacinBoys YouTube page, and you can check us out at RacinBoys on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Sounds good. Scott Traylor, RacinBoys.com. Make sure you go to the website if you are a fan of the Chili Bowl. I know a lot of you are.